coast to coast, it's your hosts, the Lombardi Leap and Mersey FB. This is Beyond the Frozen Tundra.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Lombardi. Just me again. This is kind of a bonus episode, unplanned, but kind of planned, something that I should have talked about earlier as we got into the draft season, because I know a lot of people just talk about RAS score, relative athleticism. For those of you who don't know what that is a big thing that people look at. A lot of people say the Packers look at that extensively. If you talk to Brian Gutekunst, though, he'll deny it. He'll even pretend to say he doesn't know what that is and then acknowledge that it does exist. The reality is that they have something that is similar to that. But I think when we're looking at the Packers organization, we can understand that they don't typically draft like everyone else. And I get why that frustrates fans every single year. I mean, you're sitting there on draft night, past couple of years especially. I can think of the Lucas Van Ness pick, where a lot of people are like, I do not understand why they passed on Christian Gonzalez over LVN. Like, I don't get it. Why do we keep taking these quote-unquote raw prospects? And like, realistically, I know some people know this, but a lot of people don't know this. They're not missing by accident. They are drafting by design. And when I say that is there is a method to the madness that they look at that has really been instilled in this Packers organization since Ron Wolf took over way back in, I want to say late 80s, early 90s is when he took over. 91 he took over as general manager of the Green Bay Packers. And if I talk to my parents, they can very much remind me of the rough years of the Packers organization coming out of the 80s and as we headed into the 90s. And Ron Wolf really can be credited to just absolutely saving the Green Bay Packers, because, I mean, it had been a rough couple of years there in the 80s. And I know Ron Wolf comes in, fires Lindy Infantante, hires Mike Holmgren, the 49ers offensive coordinator, and then trades for Brett Favre. Rest is history. Everybody knows that now. But it's his philosophy that, specifically when it comes to drafting, that has stuck with the Packers ever since he came in. So we're talking at 91, we're entering into 2026. I mean, that's over 30 years now, heading into 40 years. So there is a method to this madness, as much as it frustrates people. And obviously, like, I'm not in the Packers draft room. I don't have all the ins and outs here. But kind of based on what the Packers did, they do have a core belief that you can teach naturally athletic players football. This isn't to say they don't necessarily disavow production completely. Like, they do care about production to a point, but they're drafting what a player can become, not what they are right now. I mean, that's who they are. Like, Green Bay, Wisconsin is in the middle of nowhere. People would joke, the winters are cold, the stadium is open. They had to be a draft and develop franchise. Like, it's changed a bit now. I think you can argue with that with Micah Parsons coming to town. But the core philosophy of the Packers is, I will teach a player with natural traits football. So they're betting on upside, not necessarily college stats. And what I mean specifically by upside is that they will take athletic freaks over the low athletic scoring college player who maybe had a really good college career. I don't think I'm really kind of shocking everybody's mind here. Packers love athletes. They love it. They consistently draft athletes with a RAS score of 8.0 plus, 8.5 plus for premium positions. And the positions they really tend to focus on the most, I think I'd say the top three would be defensive end, offensive tackle, and tight end. And I say tight end or cornerback. Like, if you're not a high-level athlete, the Packers aren't even going to consider you, especially earlier. You could be a top 50 player, but if you test poorly in the combine, if you test poorly in like pro days and stuff like that, if you're not hitting certain thresholds, the Packers really aren't going to consider you. Obviously, the Packers don't have a first-round pick here. They have a second-round pick, the third-round pick, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. As the draft kind of goes on, they tend to let their standards relax a little bit. I mean, you can think of Cullen Oliver last year's not at all their prototypical edge that they like to take. And it's just a matter of, I don't even know if they consider him an edge, a defensive end, especially with their shift here. I mean, maybe outside linebacker. I mean, is he an actual just linebacker now? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there because he's only 6'2", 240, definitely a lot smaller than their typical defensive end here. So what are they looking for? What are they looking for at these premium positions? I mean, a lot of these are going to have size thresholds. It's going to be like the first important part. They look at specific height at certain positions. They look at specific weight at certain positions. And one of the biggest things the Packers look at, especially for two of their most prominent positions here, one of them is a big need, is offensive tackle or I would say offensive line in general and cornerback. The Packers will straight up pass on better football players if they don't meet these thresholds, especially for these positions. Looking at edge, Packers tend to be very strict here when it comes to their metrics. They like big edge rushers. I mean, you look at their roster right now, Rashawn Gary at one point, he's a Dallas Cowboy, obviously, LVN. I mean, Micah Parsons, they traded for Micah Parsons, okay? And I'll get into that here more towards the end of the episode as to free agency versus drafting. When they drafted Rashawn Gary, when they drafted Lucas Van Ness, like neither of those guys were exactly polished pass rushers. But they were all freak athletes, and that's all they needed. Those are the two prime examples of the Packers drafting these athletic, large, and in-charge athletes over more polished guys. Offensive line, oh man, it's really big on. They're really big on length. The Packers do not draft offensive guards. They don't. I know people are like, well, what about Elgton Jenkins? Elgton Jenkins, while ended up playing guard and had a failed attempt at center, played a lot of tackle in college. Sean Ryan was a left tackle in college, now our center. The Packers don't draft offensive guards in the draft at all whatsoever. What they will do is they will draft tackles and move them to guards. And they'll draft centers. They will draft centers. They've drafted a couple. Not all of them has obviously worked out, unfortunately. Josh Myers and so far Jacob Monk has not been has not turned out, but they'll draft centers. If there's a guy who they see in the draft can only play guard or has only played guard his entire college career, the Packers aren't going to touch him. They just won't do that. So a prime example, obviously, like I said, you mentioned Elgton Jenkins. He played tackle. You can think of Anthony Belton, who was just recently drafted. He played left tackle all throughout college, and he's at right guard now. If you don't have the athleticism to play outside at tackle, they move you inside to guard. They like that versatility. Another guy we can think of here, Travis Glover, unfortunately got hurt in the preseason, didn't really get to see, but he was moved to guard, and when he did play guard, I was fairly impressed with his shift there too. And there has been a philosophical shift too on this offensive line. They want bigger interior guys to deal with these bigger defensive tackles, and they want more finesse tackles. So your tackles generally are going to be a lot better athletes. That's one of the reasons why they drafted Jordan Morgan. They wanted a tackle who was a finesse tackle. Like Jordan Morgan isn't exactly the tallest guy by offensive lineman standards. He's 6'5". I believe Zach Tom is around 6'5" as well. So these are kind of your bookend. Your bookend tackles can be a bit smaller. Zach Tom's 6'4", around 304. Jordan Morgan, left tackle, 6'5", 311. But, all right, they're still strong. Jordan Morgan had a bench of 27. Zach Tom, 24. Like, both these guys were elite athletes coming out of college to play tackle. To deal with these, again, this is to counter a movement in the NFL where there's less and less big kind of power rushers like Rashawn Gary and more guys who bend around the edge. There's a lot more they're trying to get basically a lot more Micah Parsonses out there than they are necessarily trying to get more of the brute force guys. And so to counter that, you're getting these strong athletic tackles, which are hard to come by. Like it is. So that's why the offensive talent goes a lot higher too as well when it comes to the draft. But specifically, Jordan Morgan, when they drafted him in 2024, 9.25 athletic score. Another key thing that I mentioned earlier is looking at arm length. Packers have not drafted an offensive lineman, to my knowledge, especially early, so I'll preface this, but as far as I'm aware at all, Packers have not drafted an offensive lineman with sub 32-inch arms. The shortest armed tackle that I know, especially in the Brian Gutekunst era, that has been drafted is Josh Myers. and he was right on the his arm length was 32 inches on the dot. If there is a offensive lineman in the NFL draft that either a center or tackle that has sub 32-inch arms, I got news for you. Packers aren't drafting him. I believe Logan Jones is a popular pick. I'm a big fan of Logan Jones as well, but unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that his arm length, he's sub 32-inch arms. Yeah, he scored a 9.56 on for a relative athletic score, but his arm length 30.75. That's not something the Packers they don't do that. Packers don't draft that. Like they'd be fine with his height at 6'3". I believe Jacob Monk's around 6'2". And stockier as well, around 305. But because the arms, that's a deal breaker there for them. So what does this all mean there now? What are we looking for? So when it comes to tackles, you're looking for versatility. Can they potentially slide inside? Maybe if they're not the fastest, they could potentially move them to guard. I know one of the popular picks too is Dunker out of Iowa State. He pretty much is only a guard on the NFL level, but he did play tackle. I think a guy that you could see them look at too is Trey Zune out of Texas A&M, as he's played a lot of left tackle, he's played some right tackle, and took some snaps at center. So you do have that possibility there. He does have the arm length at 32 inches, so that does fit what the Packers are looking for. He is 6'6", so you're right there, and 312 pounds. So, that's pretty solid. That is pretty solid for him. That's just an example of what to kind of look for in an offensive lineman, specifically for the Green Bay Packers and what they tend to look for. 32-inch arms. Have they played multiple positions, either left side and right side at tackle? And what are they looking at weight-wise? If they're going to move into guard too, they like to have their guards be a bit bigger and beefier. They did sign Aaron Banks, and again, I'll get into some of this whole free agency stuff because the free agency metrics tend to be a little bit different. Not tend to be, they do tend to be really different over what the Packers just tend to draft. Now, obviously, we're talking about offensive line because that's a big need. I want to look at, talked about defensive end. We don't know, maybe they draft one later. One of the biggest areas of need right here, corner. Corner gets really interesting for Green Bay. We know they drafted Jair Alexander. Jair Alexander was small, but he still was when he was drafted, I believe he was 200 pounds. He was close. So he's 196. So when Jair Alexander was drafted, he was 5'10", 196. The 5'10", little bit shorter on what the Packers like in a cornerback right now. But again, everything else was elite for him. Specifically, the agility grade, elite. That is something that the two things that the Packers look for in a corner outside of the height and weight is going to be, what's their 40 time? If you're a cornerback in the NFL and you run if you're a quarterback in the NFL draft and you run a sub 4.5 40-yard dash, you're not getting drafted by the Packers. Packers don't draft 4 or 5 corners. They draft, you have to get in the mid 4.4s to be on the draft board. And on top of that too, here's another thing that a lot of people don't look at, and it's being, I guess, they're not testing it as much as well. The 3-cone drill, the Packers do quietly care a lot about the 3-cone drill. Ideally, you're looking for around a 6.6 to 6.9 for the 3-cone drill. If you get into sevens plus, I would just they're not even going to consider them. So when looking at these corners in the NFL draft, you have to ask yourself, okay, one, what's their height? Modern NFL corners are getting taller. They're getting rangier. So you're looking at 6 foot plus now, I would say, for a cornerback. Maybe they go 5'11", 5'10" later in the day or later in the draft. But predominantly 6 foot, 6'1" is going to be where you're at there. Height, arm length, 32 inches minimum. Again, this is another one of those things. 31 inches, sorry. 31 inches is going to be the minimum starting distance for their arms. Jair Alexander had 31-inch arms. If you have a corner with sub 31-inch arms, Packers aren't even really going to consider them. It's just not who they are. They like the arm length. They like the length in general. So we've gotten height. We've gotten arm length. Weight is another big one. I'd be interested to see if they tend to break some trends here. I mean, they did with Micah Robinson last year, but that's a 7th-round pick. And like I said, as we kind of get through the draft here, later in the day, they tend to take some liberties on some positions. But predominantly, early rounds here, I'm expecting them to take an early run corner. You're looking at a minimum 6-foot corner. Needs to be a minimum of 190 pounds. Arm length has to be 31 inches. And they got to run a 3-cone of around between 6'6" and 6'9". Anything below 7, anything sub 190, any sub 31-inch arms, Packers aren't going to consider them. I know a lot of people I like D'Angelo Pons as a player. That's great. Packers aren't going to touch that. Like, that's just the reality of it. He's an athlete everywhere else, but he's small, doesn't weigh much, is short. Like, unfortunately, D'Angelo Pond, sorry to break your guys' hearts here, is not on the Packers draft board as a draftable player. And if they do, like, I'll gladly admit I was wrong. I'd be shocked. But again, the modern NFL and where things are going with these bigger X wide receivers, especially in what these boundary corners are asked to do. Like, I mean, they brought in Nate Hobbs to try and play boundary, and he's more of a slot. I mean, you even look at Javon Bullard, who's playing the slot. Like, he's not exactly a small individual. Like, Javon Bullard is still 5'10", came in at 199, and was actually drafted as a safety. So I almost forgot about that. So he was drafted as safety, going to have 31-inch arms. Again, still had an 8.25 RAS score, like fitting in there. 31-inch arms, and he was drafted as a safety. So with those cornerbacks, like they want to see. I'm going to emphasize the 3-cone here especially, and the reason is I emphasize the 3-cone here is just because of the fact that they want to know that there is good change of direction. You need to be able to see the hips. They run a lot of mirror match zone coverage, and so just to be able to mirror routes is so you can kind of see that in their 3-cone drill. I think some players in this current draft would be like Dalen Everett. I really like the way he moves, even though he didn't do his 3-cone. I'm a big Malik Muhammad guy. As of recording this on the 25th today, he did at his pro day, he showed up just over 190, which is huge, and he checks a lot of other boxes for the Packers as well. So the Packers, like, ideally, they don't just want you to be a fast corner. So the 4.5 is great, or running a sub 4.5 is great. Running in the 4.4s, 4.3s is great and all that. But they want corners who can actually stay attached to the receivers when they shift on them a little bit here. And that's why the 3-cone is so important. The reality is, though, is that if you're a 6'2" corner with long arms, but you're stiff, the Packers don't care. I kind of look at Dekario Davis in this draft right now, who is one of the large corners. But he's primarily only a cover 3 guy. He doesn't move as well either on film, and I just really don't like his change of direction, and I don't think his hips are that fluid. So that's why I'm like, I don't think he's more of a line. I think his running mate, not Psylocke, Ephesians Prysock. I wanted to call him Psylocke like the X-Men, but I know that's not it. Ephesians Prysock, I think he moves better being his height of over 6'3" and around 200 pounds himself. I think he moves better than Dekario Davis. But as we kind of look at these other positions here, I don't think they're going to draft a wide receiver. I'll just kind of get into this briefly here. But the Packers like bigger wide receivers who can run. They took Matthew Golden because they predominantly do value the size speed combo. But I think Matthew Golden for them was just too hard to pass up because of how polished of a route runner he was and just how overall good. Because Matthew Golden is a bit of a smaller wide receiver than the Packers are used to using to take. I mean, you look at Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, even Dontavian Wicks was a little bit bigger, but it's a later round wide receiver, all things considered. I think Dontavian Wicks is about the same size as Matthew Golden. Either way, when they took Matthew Golden, it was definitely for the overall athleticism than it was the height. So they do break rules. They do break some rules every once in a while, but they still hold them. Like, he still tested well. He's still a freak athlete. Ran the ball well as a moved the ball well as a wide receiver. Big mover. Caught the ball. Like, I'm expecting a breakout year for Matthew Golden here moving forward with Romeo Dobbs now on the Patriots. Linebacker has kind of shifted. They used to look for really, really big athletes. Now it's speed, range, and the ability to cover and hit. Like, they're pretty much looking for an all-around linebacker here. I mean, Edgerrin Cooper was, I think, the kind of shift for that, and they realized that, and that's also why they let Quay Walker go, just because Quay Walker's coverage ability, I think a lot of people can agree, wasn't exactly the greatest here. I think we can all agree that the philosophy isn't perfect. It's not. And one of the biggest examples of this that everybody's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened, was taking Kevin King over TJ Watt. Like, this is a risk. You're betting on a prototype instead of a proven player coming out of college. And sometimes you do outsmart yourself. Sometimes it works. And it's worked specifically in regards to the Packers' ability to draft quarterbacks. Like, I know Rashawn Gary didn't necessarily pan out long term. I think that was more of a injury thing than it was necessarily a who he was as a player, if that makes sense. So I think you can count Rashawn Gary as a very good hit. I think Jair Alexander was a great hit as well, especially in the first round. And now you're getting some of these guys who are proving to be very, very good players for the Packers. Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard coming out in his second season. I mean, Tucker Kraft, very good very good tight end until his injury, unfortunately. I think Tucker Kraft's RAS score was pretty good, if I think. Yeah, he had Tucker Kraft 9.68, ran a 4.69 40. Like another elite freak athlete that the Packers drafted that turned out. Like we can criticize the RAS thing all we want, and like and to a point, I do get it because there are good players, but I think that what we need to understand is that this is the NFL, and everybody at baseline is going to be going to be a freak athlete if you're in the NFL. Like at the very minimum, 95 to 99% of the players are going to be freak athletes. And so that's why the Packers look for them. They're like, hey, we got these freak athletes. Let's teach them football. Now you have to have the coaches to do that, like, especially if you're a draft and develop. Like if these athletic traits pay off, guess what? You're not just hitting big. You're hitting big and you're hitting far on these players. So if moving forward here, you're trying to be a scout for the Packers, you're trying to scout like the Packers, you're trying to think, okay, what's their draft order? What's their top 50? You're looking at an RAS score of 8.5. You're looking at an arm length of like 32 inches for, I'd say, majority of all the positions, 31 for corner, 32 for, I'd say, all of them. They just don't like short arm guys. Look for really all around elite traits. I know I specifically talked about corner. You can kind of go back and listen to that again. I didn't really talk about defensive tackle too much. Like defensive tackle, just to kind of think about this here. They tend to like their defensive tackles around 6'3", 6'4". If they're going to be, they like them over 300 pounds, ideally around 310 to between around 310 and 330, 335-ish. And then they like to see these guys who can either rush the passer or, well, that's just this. They like guys who can stop the run, and then they'll teach them to rush the passer, because the Packers are big on this mentality of we can teach them to pass rush. That's why they brought in DeMarcus Covington, as well as promoted a couple guys too as well. They have an outside linebacker. They made DeMarcus Covington outside linebackers coach. There's a lot of different stuff going on there in that regards, which as we kind of look at these defensive tackles too, again, they want freak athletes. I think one of the guys who stands out to me the most as a potential fit, especially late round, he's a 4th round guy, is DeMonte Capehart out of Clemson. He tested phenomenally. The pass rushing technique doesn't necessarily show up on film, especially at Clemson. Part of that is because, you're playing next to Peter Woods, and it's what he was asked to do. It's just a little bit different than what he potentially could do here. He's a little bit older prospect, though, so age is kind of a big one. And I did forget to mention that, but they do like their younger players. But COVID and NIL has kind of changed some stuff like that. So Packers are willing to kind of bend some rules there, too, as well. I don't think necessarily the Packers miss on accident. Like, I do think it's purposeful at times. I jokingly say that, but it's more of a they miss on my philosophy. And once you understand that, like, you kind of start to see the board as they do here moving forward. I'll end up posting this on Twitter. You can find me at Lombardi Leap, or you can also find at Mercy FB on Twitter, and then also Beyond the Frozen Tundra. Look us up there. I'll post some of these metrics here and kind of general kind of guidelines as to what the Packers look for in their positions. But that is all, folks. Thanks for coming in. Until next time.
To Packers fans coast to coast, thanks for going beyond the frozen tundra. We appreciate you tuning in. And as always, go Pack Go!